Update. Now, moving on, during the period between the eve of the general election and the time a new president is sworn into office, the powers of the outgoing president are significantly reduced. Richard Munga now takes us through some of the powers and privileges that the outgoing president is denied.
One day to the general election, that is on the 8th of August, the head of state becomes an outgoing president, waiting to hand over the instruments of power to the successor. During this period, referred to as temporary incumbency, the Constitution deprives the president of a number of powers and privileges. The outgoing president no longer has the power to nominate or appoint judges of the superior courts, nor to nominate or appoint any other public officer. Even though he could still convene cabinet meetings, he cannot nominate, appoint, or even dismiss members of his cabinet, principal secretaries, or other state or public officers in government or public institutions. The outgoing president also surrenders the powers to nominate, appoint, or dismiss a high commissioner, ambassador, or diplomatic or consular representative. The president is also deprived of the ability to exercise the power of mercy, meaning he cannot pardon convicts. President Kenyatta will also cede the authority to confer honors in the name of the people and the republic. The outgoing president, despite his powers being clipped as per the Constitution of Kenya, could remain in office longer than expected. This would come about as the Constitution also allows aggrieved presidential candidates to challenge the results of the election in the Supreme Court. Article 140 of the Constitution says, quote-unquote, a person may file a petition in the Supreme Court to challenge the election of the president-elect within 7 days after the date of the declaration of the result of the presidential election. Within 14 days after the filing of a petition, the Supreme Court shall hear and determine the petition, and its decision shall be final. If the Supreme Court determines the election of the president-elect to be invalid, a fresh election shall be held within 60 days after the determination. End of quote. Should the presidential poll be nullified by the court after a successful petition, the latest date that IEBC can hold a fresh poll would be November 4th, 2022. Thereafter, the Electoral Board must declare the results by November 10th, 7 days after the polls are held. If no arising petition is filed, then the president-elect will be sworn in on November 29th, which is the first Tuesday, 14 days after the results are announced. This means the outgoing president would have been under temporary incumbency for approximately 3 months and 3 weeks. Article 141 of the Constitution says a president must be sworn into office by either the Chief Justice or his or her deputy when the Chief Justice is unable to preside over the ceremony due to unavoidable circumstances. The swearing-in ceremony must be held between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m.
Is soon to witness yet another change of guard at the presidency following the August 2022 general poll. After serving for a maximum of 2 5-year terms at the helm of the country's leadership, it is time for outgoing President Uhuru Kenyatta to vacate State House and create room for his successor. This historic transition is spearheaded by the assumption of office of President Committee. So exactly what does this transition entail? Jackie Wambiro has that story.
The transition of one presidential administration to the next is a process that commences way ahead of the general election. The incumbent government is expected to establish a committee at least 30 days before a general election, dubbed the Assumption of the Office of President Committee, to steer the process according to the Assumption of the Office of President Act.
Upanga hiyo ishara ya kwamba amekuwa amiri jeshi mkuu wa majeshi yote ya ulinzi.
The provisions of the Act apply to the assumption of the office of President by a President-elect, and with necessary modification to the assumption of the office of President by the Deputy President or the Speaker of the National Assembly under Article 146, Section 2 of the Constitution. The committee is an ad hoc committee and consists of the Secretary to the Cabinet, who shall be the chairperson, in this case Head of Public Service Joseph Kenywa, who has been acting as the Secretary to the Cabinet since 2015. The Cabinet Secretary of the Ministry responsible for matters relating to the registration of persons and immigration, the Principal Secretary in the Ministry responsible for matters relating to internal security, the Principal Secretary in the Ministry responsible for matters relating to finance, the Principal Secretary in the Ministry responsible for matters relating to foreign affairs, the Principal Secretary in the Ministry responsible for matters relating to information and communication, the Principal Secretary in the Ministry for the time being responsible for matters relating to constitutional affairs, the Principal Secretary in the Ministry responsible for matters relating to Cabinet Office, the Principal Secretary in the Ministry responsible for matters relating to local government, the Principal Secretary in the Ministry responsible for matters relating to culture and social services, the Chief of Defence Forces, the Director General of the National Intelligence Service, the Inspector General of the National Police Service, the person in charge of the administration of the affairs of State House, the Clerk of the National Assembly, the Chief Registrar of the Judiciary, 3 persons nominated by the President-elect, the Clerk of the Senate, and the Secretary to the Intergovernmental Relations Secretariat appointed under the law relating to intergovernmental relations.
The functions of the assumption of the office of the President Committee are to 1. Facilitate handing over the process of the outgoing President.
The functions and powers of the committee include facilitating the handing over process by the outgoing President to the President-elect, organizing for the security of the President-elect, organizing for the necessary facilities and personnel for the President-elect, coordinating the briefings of the President-elect by relevant public officers, facilitating communication between the outgoing President and the President-elect, preparing the program and organizing for the swearing-in ceremony, and carrying out any other activity necessary for the performance of its functions under this Act and perform any other function assigned to it under any other written law. The committee may from time to time establish subcommittees for the better carrying out of its functions under this Act. The 3 committee members nominated by the President-elect under Section 5, Subsection 2 of R may cause the chairperson to call for a meeting to consider important matters of an urgent nature regarding the assumption of office by the President-elect. Upon the declaration of the final results of a presidential election by the Commission under Article 138 of the Constitution and Section 39 of the Election Act No. 24 of 2011, the committee shall ensure that the President-elect and Deputy President-elect are accorded adequate security. The committee shall ensure that the President-elect under Section 9 receives security briefings from the respective national security organs. The swearing-in of the President-elect is conducted in a public ceremony held in the capital city in accordance with the Constitution.
And I will do justice to all.
In accordance with this Constitution.
In accordance with this Constitution.
As by law established.
As by law established.
The committee publishes by notice in the Gazette the date and place for the conduct of the swearing-in ceremony. The day on which the President-elect is sworn in shall be a public holiday. The Inspector General of the National Police Service is expected to ensure the provision of adequate security during the conduct of the swearing-in ceremony. During the swearing-in ceremony, a presidential motorcade is on standby at the residences of the President-elect and his deputy, who are heavily guarded by a contingent of General Service Unit officers who will guide them to the swearing-in ceremony. The presidential procession, with a similar number of vehicles as the outgoing president's normal fleet, then proceeds to the inauguration event. In the case of President Kenyatta, the venue was at the Kasarani Stadium. The President-elect is expected to be sworn in on the first Tuesday following the 14th day after the date of the declaration of the presidential election result. Only if no petition has been filed, the President-elect is then afforded all the presidential rights his predecessor enjoyed even before taking the oath of office. The motorcade of the President-elect and his deputy make their way into the grounds, flanked by a military parade, which is ready for their arrival. The President-elect takes and subscribes the oath or affirmation of allegiance and the oath or affirmation for the execution of the functions of office in accordance with the Constitution. The oath or affirmation shall be administered to the President-elect by the Chief Registrar of the Judiciary before the Chief Justice, or in the absence of the Chief Justice, the Deputy Chief Justice, not earlier than 10 a.m. and not later than 2 p.m. The event's grounds are opened to the public as early as 6 a.m. The Deputy Chief Justice undertakes the task only in circumstances where the Chief Justice is incapacitated. Upon taking or subscribing to the oath of affirmation, the President signs a certificate of inauguration in the presence of the Chief Justice or in the absence of the Chief Justice, the Deputy Chief Justice. Upon signing the certificate of inauguration, the outgoing President hands over to the President the following instruments of power: a sword and the Constitution. The provisions of this section do not apply where the incumbent is re-elected into office. The Deputy President-elect takes and subscribes to the oath or affirmation of allegiance and oath or affirmation for the execution of the functions of office in accordance with the Constitution.
I will protect and uphold
the sovereignty, integrity,
and
dignity of the people of Kenya. So
Upon the swearing in of the Deputy President-elect, the President gives an inauguration speech to the nation.
into multi-party politics only 20 years ago, further strengthening and entrenching our democracy. When the records remind us of
Later on, the newly sworn-in president is driven around the stadium in an open Land Rover to greet Kenyans in attendance, after which he is driven to his new abode, State House. Upon meeting with his predecessor, the outgoing president vacates the premises, signifying that a new administration has officially ascended to power. The day-to-day functioning of the government before and during the assumption of office by the president-elect are subject to the constitutional provisions regarding transition and succession of institutions, offices, assets and liability.